This video is the penultimate episode to this series, a companion video to the next and last video, part 6. These are meant to be viewed side by side to see an accurate and close comparison of the full dynamics of the leadership system in play. This video will show everything possible to be done with it at once in the vanilla game. The next video will show all modifiers relevant to the battle for just one faction though. This might sound a bit disappointing on the surface, however it is anything but. AOTR offers so many modifiers more per faction than vanilla that it's necessary to showcase only one of the factions. As for this video, all possible active modifier types will be shown from all factions possible, which includes all leaderships, buffs, spells, and debuffs that are possible to stack in the radius of a battle at one time, and to be active in a team game. In this video, the one exception is Theoden, since this demonstration is just for swordsmen and not for cavalry. This might sound overwhelming on the surface, but as we've explored in previous videos, the vanilla game just does not offer much variety in this way at all. Here's a good way to describe what I'm trying to get at. For example, in vanilla, while you could have in play a fortress with banners and a heroic statue, along with a hero with a leadership, all near each other, none of the leaderships would be stacking with each other, even though all would be active. So only one hero with leadership buffing out troops will be shown in this demonstration, not any of the structures just mentioned. These battles are to showcase only the active modifiers possible that can stack with each other at one time in the small radius of a battle. Which is to say, as I've said before in the series many times, only one leadership, one buff, one debuff, and X number of spells, up to a total of 5 spells possible. Showing this full dynamic in this way will draw attention quite powerfully to the massive difference found in AOTR, to be seen in part 6, the final video in this series, and help you to understand all the differences of the system between the two games at once. In these matchups, we'll see something a little different than what we've seen previously in the series. We've already seen what they're capable of previously before, so let's up the ante. This time we'll have 8 battalions of Gondor swordsmen, non-upgraded, against 4 battalions of fully upgraded Angmar troops. And we've seen in Part 4, Section A, the impact of debuffs, how effective the Tier 2 Angmar troops at taking out the same amount of Gondor troops when the Angmar soldiers are not upgraded. To balance the scales a little bit, the Gondor troops will have Aragorn's leadership, Glorfindel's Starlight, Dane's Mighty Rage, Mordor's Darkness, and the Elves' Elven Wood. However, the Angmar side will also have War Chant, Frozen Land, and Morgremir's Dark Glory spell. What's more, Morgrimir will also be using his normal debuff to debuff my troops. It will not take away Aragorn's leadership, but it will still do a substantial amount of debuffing. The purpose of this video is to see the full dynamics of the leadership system, minus Theoden's glorious charge, for just swordsman versus swordsman to keep it simple and clear, following up on and finishing everything that came before in this series. You'll see things happen very quickly for both sides, so let's give a brief rundown. I am playing the Men of the West and am allied with Mordor, Dwarves, and Elves. My opponent is Angmar, allied with just Goblins. What you'll see happen on my side is Elven Wood and Dane's Mighty Rage, followed up pretty quickly with Glorfindel's Starlight. I'll actually be in control of my Dwarf ally's hero King Dane and my Elf ally's hero Glorfindel, so as to be able to show their spells and use myself, but my Mordor ally will be independent as you would expect. Mordor's Darkness will cancel the Goblin's Darkness immediately. You'll see Rallying Call available, but it will not be used because it cannot be active and stacked with Elven Wood. Aragorn is buffing in the middle with his leadership. On the enemy's side, you'll quickly see them use War Chant, Frozen Land, and Morgremir's Dark Glory all at once in the very first second or two of the game. Remember that War Chant is active and stacks with Frozen Land, an unfortunate imbalance in the system. But my ally cancels out the Goblin's Darkness spell with his own to tip that balance just a tiny amount. It should also be noted, Morgamir will be debuffing my troops. I won't use the Sunlight spell as it would go against the purpose of this demonstration, which is to use only the modifier-related abilities, spells, buffs, etc. The Sunlight power is not one of them. So without further ado, let's see what happens. Only 30 Gondor troops of 120 remain. Had my Mordor ally not used darkness, we would have lost. Timing a weather power is crucial, especially up against a powerful foe like Angmar's Dark Dunedain. But so is knowing which weather power to use. If I had decided to overturn my ally's darkness with my sunlight power, the Angmar troops would have won the day. Angmar's troops are tough and were hard to stop, with even Dane's mighty rage debuffing them for a time. Morgamir's normal passive debuff was doing a number on the buff I got from the Darkness spell. The Darkness spell gives a 25% boost to damage and armor recall, and Morgamir debuffs the same amount. But even if I had as my ally Isengard instead of Mordor to use Freezing Rain to debuff them longer than Dane's debuff could last, the outcome would not have been much better. Only a handful more troops would have survived. With weather powers, you typically want to wait until your enemy casts his first so as to cancel it out. In many pro games, I've seen it to where no player uses weather buffs at all, for fear of the enemy getting the upper hand. And now you can see just how much of an upper hand one can give, and why it can be so feared. Angmar would have had me without a weather power. Now, let's see the impact having the Witch King on the field can make, even in spite of all the buffs and spells arrayed against his smaller force. This time, I will have an Isengard ally instead of Mordor. He will use Freezing Rain to try to debuff the enemy, but the enemy's Witch King will be debuffing my troops and nullifying their leadership. We'll see both sides debuffing for the whole match, rather than just Dane's ability debuffing for a fraction of the time. So this will be a fascinating study. Again, Angmar will be fully upgraded. Let's see how it works. One unit totally tipped the balance. The Witch King is a powerful unit indeed to be able to contend with so much arrayed against him and win the day, at least in respect to the leadership system. Not only did he cancel out Aragorn's leadership, but his substantial debuff nullified much of the boost to the Gondor troops from the Elven Wood buff and the 2 spells. Even the sunlight power would not have availed much in this situation. Even Mordor's darkness instead of Isengard's freezing rain would not have helped enough. I lost a large percentage of my boosts when Aragorn's leadership was cancelled. The darkness spell would not have compensated for that, as a large percentage of that boost would have been taken away by the Witch King's debuff. He is a fearsome adversary indeed. As regards both sides debuffing, this is a tougher thing to see as there is a good deal of asymmetry involved in this matchup. You might think that because the good side has so much more going for it that it would win out even with the Witch King, but what ultimately tips the scales back on it is the removal of Aragorn's leadership. What's more though is that while Freezing Rain does nullify leadership modifiers, the enemy doesn't have any leadership modifiers to remove in this matchup, and Freezing Rain cannot cancel out the buff, spell, or debuff modifiers, only greatly decrease their damage and armor boosts. As great as Freezing Rain's decrease of those is though, the Witch King's is better, 33% versus 25% with Freezing Rain. Naturally, in this matchup the battle would not be over, but that's not the point in this demonstration. It's only to show clearly how only the modifiers work apart from heroes contributing physically to the combat as well. It's tricky to understand in the heat of a battle, so I hope that this last demonstration helps to push away any remaining doubts, now that you've seen all modifiers at the same time. So why explore so much about the severely limited variety of stackable spells and the intricacies of how spells, leadership, buffs, and debuffs work and cancel each other, etc.? Simple. It's to introduce the sharp contrast to AOTR's massive overhaul to and simplification of this whole system. AOTR takes a far more dynamic approach to their usage, not limiting each faction to one damage armor spell as in vanilla, nor even limiting the sources of them to just heroes and spellbook powers, but including non-heroic and heroic units as sources of them, and heroic units being able to be affected by them. As if that were not enough, even structure damage and armor can be boosted by some units, leaderships, buffs, and spells in AOTR, and stack for the ultimate turtle player. So why can't we stack heroes' leadership to get the same or better results on a permanent basis, rather than relying upon short-lived spells, buffs, debuffs, and spellbook powers here in The Rise of the Witch King? Simple. It's a flawed design in the code. Leaderships will turn on for one hero for a few seconds, then turn off, then a second hero's leadership will turn on for a few seconds, turn off, and so on. Furthermore, buffs will simply replace one another, same with debuffs. It's why all leadership values are the same as each other, and why all buff values are the same as each other, and why bigger debuffs like the Witch King's override smaller debuffs instead of stacking, as you would expect two modifiers with different values to do. So in the vast majority of games, players are handicapped in vanilla to one leadership and one buff to boost damage and armor, and maybe get one spell, depending on the faction played. Isengard having no spells, of course. Hoping for more than that, given the severe limitations of spell combos, is almost pointless given how it would take considerable coordination between team players to pull off. Needless to say, the handicaps imposed on leaderships, buffs, and debuffs is unfortunate. Versatility suffers, and the approach to factions to differentiate them from each other in terms of the modifier system feels repetitive and uninspired. And it limits teamwork. So this unfortunate design puts players into a bottleneck for strategic options and limits creativity and dynamics of play. It lacks depth. While Vanilla's modifier system isn't this way because of a bug, it certainly performs like it is because of a bug, what with leaderships flickering and buffs replacing one another. Such severe limitations for the sake of simplicity is not a good trade-off when compared to the possibilities like we're about to see in the Age of the Ring mod. It makes each faction feel like you've seen it before and keeps them from being thematically unique. As for the aforementioned limitations in the code, all it would have taken was but a changing of only a single line of code for each modifier type to free up the whole system. Doing something so simple, players would have been able to combine many leaderships, buffs, and debuffs in either single player or in team games. For all they were set on making a modifier system of simplicity, the irony is that Vanilla's developers let these lines of code be changeable at all, thus letting modifiers stack. The limitations are not hard-coded in. So the very code itself of the modifier system can allow for versatility, creativity, and better teamwork, all by changing just those few lines in the code. The Vanilla's developers left all this and the incredible potential it holds on the cutting room floor is difficult to understand. Luckily, Age of the Rings developers saw this potential and fixed the flawed design of the code. The next part in this series will finally begin to cover in detail the AOTR overhaul of the whole system. This is the final video in the series, so we're going to go out with a bang. We haven't dealt much with the AOTR overhaul, so rather than show a lot of videos telling about the small stuff, we'll do one epic battle showing it. We know enough about the system at this point that the time for half measures is over. Let's roll up our sleeves and get ready to rumble. Set the stage with the new units involved before diving right in. Here we'll be using Gondor's beginning game swordsman unit, the Clansmen of Lamadon, against Rivendell's upper tier Elven swordsmen. You'll notice they have a powerful damage boosting ability they'll use accompanied by blue flashes, which is their default magic damage. Very powerful unit. Stats are reflected in their costs. "37 units remain. Not surprisingly, the clansmen could barely touch these higher tier units. Now, let's turn to the full dynamics of play of AOTR's leadership system. Immediately, we see a big difference. Here you will see 4 different structures with 4 different leaderships, all stacking. This is precisely how the vanilla game would look in terms of the full dynamics of the leadership system, where there are no imposed limitations in the code. Red represents the Dol Amroth citadels, purple the statue, blue the fortresses, and green the lone towers. All of these are all the structures in the Gondor faction which have leadership, so all leadership-centered structures are being used to maximize this demonstration. As you can see, the structures have been carefully placed on either end to cover 2 battalions and a little more, but any overlap of the same structure does not stack, as no 2 same structures stack leadership, just like with no 2 same heroes. You can see a small gap in the middle where the 2 blue fortress radius circles do not overlap. This is to have the fortresses far enough from the edge of the troops to allow for the best flexibility of movement for them in the battle, while still maximizing on their leadership radius. You'll see, however, there's only so much which can be done with AI. Regardless, the small radius of the rallying call buff will be placed there to help compensate. All structures' arrow fire has been either disabled, or where they could not be disabled, the glowing statues at the top and bottom of the screen draw their fire. Here you can see the enemy elves walking safely around all of these buildings to show they cannot harm them. This is to keep the modifier test's integrity intact without interfering with the battle, so you'll see only the leadership system affecting the clansmen. This applies, of course, also to all heroes and support units on either side. They will remain outside of the battle proper. Only the clansmen and the elves will battle. And here is the line of our primary unit to keep track of during the battle. No other unit will join the battle. And not only are the building's leaderships all stacking with one another, but they stack with all the heroes' leaderships, and, as you shall see, all of the spells and buffs to be thrown around in this battle. Here are all of them that will be in use. These are all of them that can affect our primary units, the Lamedon clansmen. You'll find that there are 18 total modifiers in play. 9 leadership modifiers, 2 buffs, 3 spells, 1 debuff, and 3 abilities which are not listed as any of the above, but which are actually spells. Of all of these, it should be noted that several of them are experience boosts, which stack with one another, not damage and armor boosts. And you'll see this dramatically in action as our primary units max out their levels quite fast, which in turn will give them their own armor at level 4. Denethor's Stone of Anarion ability isn't actually necessary in this battle, as it only takes away enemy leadership, and the enemy doesn't have any leadership modifier at all. It's used regardless to show the additional representation of what you can do with the system in its full dynamic, as it is in this specific demonstration. Take a quick look at the rest. The 18 modifiers previously discussed are only about half of the total of the faction, though. There are actually 32 in total. While they won't be used in this demonstration, they're still important to know they are in the faction, so as to give a better understanding of the full dynamics possible in this faction. So let's take a quick look at the ones not used. So there are 14 total modifiers in this faction which will not be used in this battle. 7 leaderships, 3 spells, 4 unlisted, but which are actually spells. Boromir's Captain of the White Tower leadership affects Tier 2 Anorian swordsmen, also known as Soldiers of Minas Tirith, pikes, and archers. So it does not affect our primary unit, the clansmen. As for Denethor's Contest of Wills ability, I could have used it, but it's only used against heroes, and the enemy heroes are not in the combat at all. So it would have been irrelevant to the nature of this battle, demonstrating the system's effect on units, not heroes. As in the vanilla matchup, cavalry were not included for the sake of simplicity and clarity, so cavalry leadership will not be represented here in the AOTR matchup either, as found in the heroes of Imrahil and Faramir. Elite archer leadership also will not be represented, as found in Faramir as well. Neither will hero leaderships that buff fellow heroes, as is found in various heroes like Pippin, Forlong, Baragond, Elisar, and Denethor. The other remaining modifiers that will not be used in this battle are structure boosts. You'll see the Fountain Guards use their Ardent Defender's ability, buffing out structures, but that aspect of their ability will not actually come into play in this demonstration, even though you'll see the white tree symbol over the structures being buffed in this battle. Only the debuff and troop healing aspects of their ability will come into play in the battle. The only hero for the faction who buffs structures is Baragond, who is not relevant to this demonstration and so will not be in the battle. But Gondor does have the stoneworker structure to boost structure armor as well, but it also is not relevant to the battle. Not including these modifiers in this demonstration is to keep things clear and simple. It's enough to know that they are in the faction to give a taste of everything the faction can do with the system. Otherwise, all leaderships, buffs, spells, and debuffs are represented for the Gondor faction as pertains to what can be used on our primary unit. It bears mentioning that these are the total that can be active in the same confined radius of a battle for this faction. This doesn't include the much higher number for team matches, which is many times more this. In these matchups, we're going to have something of an inverse of what was presented in the vanilla matchups. This time, we'll have the 4 battalions of Lamedon clansmen up against 8 battalions of the Rivendell swordsmen, all fully upgraded. We've seen how hard it is for our primary unit to take down one of them without upgrades. Let's see what happens against 2 fully upgraded battalions. Gondor will have no allies, so as to show all of the active modifiers of just this one faction. This is to draw an even sharper contrast against the total active modifiers of the 4 allies in the vanilla matchups. The Rivendell enemy will have 1 ally, Mordor. You will see them using the faction's 2 Black Riders. Unlike in the vanilla matchups though, there will be no weather buffs used for either side, so as to emphasize the impact of so many modifiers stacking at once, and how their counterpart debuffs play such a massive role in countering them. In this way, it should be noted that just like other modifiers in AOTR, the debuffs of the Nazgul do stack. This will be very important later. So without further ado, let's watch how it all pans out.
There we go! We're attacking! Hold them, Guardsmen! I stand as your captain! Maganda! And your command! Hit the enemy! Our lands are under siege!
Our blades are at the ready. Shoulder those swords. Clansmen, move out.
A substantial victory for these Tier 1 non-upgraded units against twice their number with far more power, proving the AOTR leadership system's dynamic nature to allow for many different strategies and styles of play. And as you saw, this dynamism offers many times more leaderships, buffs, spells, and debuffs for one faction than several together in vanilla. It should be noted that it is unlikely for any player to stack these structures in this way or similar ways due to the way battles typically go, but also simply because all of these structures are made to be support structures, with maybe 2 or 3 together in the field. Regardless, it drives the point home rather nicely. After all, the point of this video is twofold. It is not to show an all-out, knockdown, show-stopping brawl. No, rather, 1, it is to show all that can be done with the leadership system for one faction buffing out just one unit, and 2, to show that with the right leadership, buff, spell, or even debuff combo, you can turn even the most middling Tier 1 troops into upper tier juggernauts. You can do it with one faction, as seen here, but it's especially well done in team games, as you can now well imagine based on all you've seen in this series. The flexibility and ease is far more capable than the severe limitations imposed on the vanilla system to do so even in team games. It's just unfortunate that this dynamic could have easily been accomplished in vanilla, but was decided against. This large battle is a bit of an exaggeration, but it still drives the point home that with creativity, resourcefulness, and teamwork especially, you can successfully strategize using cheap, weak beginning game units even into the late game against overwhelming odds, and consistently use them at virtually all times, not just limited time periods as seen in vanilla with the time limits of buffs and spells. In AOTR, with the amount of heroes with the leadership modifier running around, especially with structure leaderships, you can make a veritable super trooper force anywhere as long as they last. So this video is to show clearly what you can do with just boosts helping you, apart from heroes or other support aiding in the fights firsthand through physical combat. Now let's see one more demonstration to show the effect just one of the most powerful units in the game, the Witch King, can make on the outcome of even the most carefully planned strategy. This was a complete rout. Couldn't even finish activating all my modifiers, and all enemy units remained alive. Now, of course the battle wouldn't be over. The Witch King force would be hard pressed against such an array of heroes, structures, etc. But again, that is not the purpose of this battle. Effectively, what just this one hero did would look like this in terms of what modifiers were active, or at least not debuffed to the point of being useless. Needless to say, Gondor and other factions reliant upon heroes and modifiers can have a very hard time against a faction such as Mordor. So long as the Mordor player prioritizes keeping the Nazgul protected, victory comes much easier. This defeat goes to show that one unit with the passive nullifier debuff, like the Witch King, cancels out any and all nearby leadership modifiers simultaneously, regardless of whether those modifiers belong to a hero or a structure. The Witch King is not the only hero who can do this, by the way. And with his debuff stacking with one of the Black Rider's debuffs, all the buffs and spells opposing them are nullified dramatically, if not completely, against these two mere debuffs stacking. You'll notice that Gandalf's Rekindled Heart's anti-debuff was used alongside the Fountain Guard's Ardent Defender's ability, which has a debuff to enemy units. But even with those powers used early, they could not make enough of a difference against the Witch King. But the Witch King's debuff, recall, does not nullify the buff or spell modifiers, only the leadership modifier. But there simply weren't enough buffs and spells to compensate for all the lost leadership modifiers proper due to the two Nazgul stacking their debuffs against them. This is one of the strengths of Gondor, and simultaneously its weakness when up against the right faction, like Mordor. Gondor carries the game with so many heroes with leaderships that it can struggle a great deal against the many debuffs Mordor has, especially if the Mordor player incorporates the Flying Fell Beasts, because then that player can debuff from the skies. Something to keep in mind for any players relying on factions for their heroes, like dwarves. You may be wondering how a higher tier unit may have done in this situation. I tested the highest tier swordsman for Gondor, the Anorian swordsman, also known as the Soldiers of Minas Tirith, in the same matchup with very similar results. Even with their shield wall ability, they held out for only a little bit longer, doing a small amount more damage, but were quickly overrun. It goes to show you that with proper forethought, just one unit really can make a big difference. Now that we've seen so much on the dynamics of play in this series, let's take a step back to view it from a fresh perspective for just a moment. AOTR provides extra incentive to turtle players and the more aggressive. The vanilla game is more oriented towards the aggressive side, not leaning so heavily on the merits and rewards of base building. In this way, AOTR feels more organic, real, and involving, and brings the War of the Ring to life in ways the vanilla game just can't offer due to the limitations imposed by its flawed design. The difference is truly night and day. The way AOTR plays out allows the player to experience the various people's story and struggles in the War of the Ring in a more tactile, visceral way that genuinely reflects their story in that legendary war. I hope you've enjoyed this rather extended series and that you had as much fun watching it as I had making it. Good luck and have fun. Maybe we'll see each other on the battlefield and you can use this knowledge against me.